Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. My grandmother Elspeth passed away in the spring. It wasn't unexpected. She'd lived a long, full life, mostly quiet, especially in her later years. I hadn't seen her as often as I perhaps should have, living several states away, but my childhood memories were filled with her soft voice, the scent of lavender water she always wore, and the gentle click of her knitting needles. Sorting through her belongings felt like sifting through the remnants of a gentle tide that had receded, leaving behind shells and driftwood whispering of the past. Most items were mundane clothes, books, photographs. But one piece stood out: her favorite shawl. I remembered it vividly from my visits. It was large, knitted from heavy, dark gray wool, with an intricate, almost Celtic-looking cable pattern running through it. It wasn't fancy, but it felt substantial, comforting. She was almost always wearing it when I saw her, draped over her shoulders as she sat in her favorite armchair by the window, reading or knitting. It seemed to carry her scent, that familiar powdery lavender. Taking it home felt like bringing a tangible piece of her presence into my own quiet apartment. I carefully folded it and placed it over the back of a comfortable, wing-backed armchair in my living room, a silent tribute. For the first few days, it was just that, a comforting memento. Sometimes I'd run my hand over the thick wool expecting warmth, but finding it surprisingly cool to the touch, even when the apartment was warm. I attributed it to the dense material. It also felt heavier than I remembered, possessing a peculiar weightiness when I lifted it to dust underneath. Again, just dense wool, I told myself. The first truly odd thing happened about a week later. I came home from work and noticed the shawl wasn't draped quite as I'd left it. One corner seemed to have slipped further down the armrest, the fold less neat. Must have just settled. I thought carefully readjusting it to its previous position. But the next morning it was slightly different again, this time perhaps folded more tightly over the back. It was subtle, easily dismissed as my own faulty memory or the fabric simply shifting on the smooth upholstery. Yet, it planted a tiny seed of unease. Grandmother was meticulous, her shawl was never left untedily. Then came the scent. Late one evening, reading on the sofa across the room from the armchair, I caught a faint, unmistakable whiff of lavender water. Exactly the kind grandmother used. It was fleeting, gone almost as soon as I registered it. I looked towards the chair where the shawl lay in the dim lamplight. The air around it seemed still. I sniffed again. Nothing. Just a memory triggered by looking at it. I reasoned, though my heart had begun to beat a little faster. But the scent returned. Always late at night, always faint, always seeming to emanate from the vicinity of the armchair and the shawl. It was never overpowering, just a delicate, ghostly reminder that would drift into my awareness and then vanish, leaving me questioning my senses. It wasn't unpleasant, carrying with it waves of nostalgia and a pang of grief, but its inexplicability was unsettling. The shawl itself continued its subtle migrations. Sometimes I'd find it pulled slightly on the seat of the armchair, as if someone had just stood up. Once, I found a distinct indentation in the plush seat cushion underneath where the shawl lay folded, precisely the shape of someone having sat there for a considerable time. My rational mind fought back the cushion was old. Maybe it just held shapes longer now. But the impression was too perfect, too suggestive. The feeling of being watched began then. It wasn't a hostile feeling, not like the prickling menace some ghost stories describe. It was quieter, more attentive. When I was in the living room, especially when sitting near the armchair, I would sometimes get the distinct sensation that I wasn't entirely alone, that a quiet, unseen presence was simply there, observing me patiently. My gaze would inevitably drift towards the shawl draped silently over the chair back. Was it just the object, imbued with memory, triggering these feelings? Or was something connected to it? Perhaps grandmother herself lingering? The uncertainty was profoundly disturbing. The dreams started a few weeks later. They weren't nightmares, not exactly, but they were deeply unsettling. I would dream I was back in grandmother's house, sitting with her in her familiar living room. She would be wearing the gray shawl, knitting quietly, just as I remembered her. But her face, it would be filled with an immense sadness, her eyes pleading, as if trying to tell me something desperately important. Sometimes she would lift a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, pointing towards the shawl she wore, then back towards me. She never spoke in the dreams, the silence thick with unspoken warnings or sorrow. I'd wake up with tears inexplicably wet on my cheeks, my heart aching with a confusing mix of grief and apprehension. What was she trying to tell me? Or was it just my own subconscious wrestling with loss? The fleeting touches began subtly. Reaching for the lamp on the side table next to the armchair, I felt something incredibly light and colder than the airbrush against the back of my hand, like a single strand of silk. I flinched, looked down. Nothing. Another time, standing near the chair, lost in thought, I felt a brief, distinct pressure on my shoulder, my cold fingertips resting there for just a second before vanishing. Each time, my breath would catch, goosebumps would rise, and I'd scan the empty room, finding no source, only the heavy gray shawl resting impassively on the chair. Was it her? A gentle reassurance? Or was I misinterpreting something else entirely? The coldness associated with the shawl intensified. It wasn't just cool to the touch anymore. The area around the armchair often felt noticeably colder than the rest of the room. Sometimes, sitting on the sofa opposite, I could almost feel a faint drift of cold air moving towards me from that direction, carrying with it the faintest hint of lavender. My feelings became a confusing tangle. Part of me yearned for the presence to be grandmother, a comforting sign that she wasn't truly gone. Another part was deeply unnerved by the persistent, inexplicable phenomena. Was it truly her spirit, tethered somehow to this object? Or was it something else, something wearing her memory like a disguise? The ambiguity was perhaps the most frightening part. The event that solidified my fear happened on a particularly cold, windy night. I had gone to bed early, feeling drained and unsettled. I remember pulling the duvet up tight, shivering slightly despite the heating being on. I must have fallen asleep quickly. I woke up abruptly, unsure what time it was, but knowing it was the dead of night. The reason for my waking was immediate and terrifying. I was freezing. Not just cool, but bone-chillingly cold, the kind that makes your teeth chatter. And there was a tremendous weight on top of me, pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. Panic seized me as I realized what the weight was. It was the shawl. Grandmother's heavy, gray wool shawl, which I had definitely left draped over the armchair in the living room, was now spread entirely over my body, from my shoulders down to my feet, pinning me beneath its impossible weight. It felt 10 times heavier than it ever had before, like being crushed under wet sand. I tried to struggle to push it off, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. The cold emanating from the wool was intense, seeping through my pajamas, through the duvet, chilling me to the core. And then I felt it, the distinct tactile sensation of arms, cold, unseen arms, wrapped around me from underneath the shawl, holding it firmly in place, pressing it down. It wasn't a violent grip, not crushing, but possessive, inescapable. It felt like a chilling, unyielding embrace from something impossibly strong and colder than ice. A strangled cry escaped my throat. I thrashed wildly, fueled by pure terror. For a moment, the pressure held firm, the cold intensifying. Then, suddenly, the weight lessened, the feeling of the arms vanished. I flung the shawl off me with a surge of adrenaline. It landed in a heavy heap on the floor beside the bed. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, body trembling violently, backing away towards the door. my eyes fixed on the inert gray shape on the floor. The intense cold lingered in the air where it had lain. Was that grandmother, trying to comfort me from the cold, or keep me warm in some misguided spectral way? Or was it something else entirely, something possessive trying to claim me? The feeling hadn't been comforting, it had been terrifying, suffocating. I couldn't keep it in the apartment anymore. The ambiguity had tipped into fear. The next day I carefully folded the shawl, the wool still feeling unnaturally cold and heavy. I wrapped it in plastic, then placed it inside an old wooden chest I had in the back of my closet, locking the chest firmly. Out of sight, contained. Since then, the overt phenomena have ceased. The shawl remains locked away, but the apartment doesn't feel entirely clear. Occasionally, late at night, I still catch that faint, fleeting scent of lavender water drifting through the living room. Sometimes, the air around the armchair where it used to rest feels inexplicably cold for a moment or two. The feeling of a quiet presence hasn't entirely vanished either. It's fainter, more distant, but I sometimes still feel that gentle, attentive observation, especially when I think about her. I don't know if locking away the shawl trapped her spirit, or angered it, or simply removed its anchor. I don't know if the presence I feel now is her watching over me, her trapped sorrow, or something else entirely that was drawn to the object and the grief surrounding it. I live with the uncertainty, the quiet chill, the ghostly fragrance that serves as a constant, unsettling reminder that some connections, some presences linger long after death, their intentions forever shrouded in mystery. There's a certain allure to forgotten things, objects imbued with the silent histories of previous owners. I found the music box tucked away in the dusty corner of a sprawling antique mall, nestled amongst tarnished silver and faded photographs. It wasn't large, crafted from a dark, heavy wood, possibly rosewood or ebony, intricately carved with swirling floral patterns that seemed to writhe under my fingertips. A small, ornate brass key protruded from the side. Lifting the lid revealed a velvet-lined interior, slightly faded, and a tiny, delicately painted porcelain ballerina poised on a mirrored base. She wore a chipped, pale pink tutu, her arms frozen mid-pose, her painted eyes fixed in a permanent, serene gaze. Intrigued, I carefully wound the key. A delicate, tinkling melody emerged, surprisingly clear despite the box's apparent age. It was a simple tune, short and repetitive, perhaps a fragment of a classical lullaby or a folk song, sweet, slightly melancholic, possessing a fragile, old-world charm. The ballerina twirled slowly on her mirrored stage as it played. I was captivated. It felt like holding a captured piece of time. I bought it immediately, envisioning it sitting on my mantelpiece, a quiet, elegant presence in my otherwise modern apartment. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. I'd wind it occasionally, listen to the brief, gentle melody, watch the ballerina's slow pirouette, and feel a sense of quiet nostalgia. It was a charming artifact, nothing more. The first time it played on its own, I almost didn't register it. It was very late, the apartment silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. A faint, tinkling sound drifted from the living room. The music box. My first thought was mundane. Had I left it partially wound? Had vibrations from a passing truck somehow jolted the mechanism? I went to look. The lid was slightly ajar, the melody just finishing its cycle. The key felt completely unwound. Strange, but I closed the lid firmly and thought little more of it, perhaps attributing it to the settling of the old mechanism. But it happened again a few nights later, and again the following week. Always late at night, always just one cycle of the simple, familiar tune. It was never loud, just a delicate intrusion into the silence. I started making sure the key was fully unwound before bed, even checked that the mantelpiece was perfectly stable. Still, it would occasionally play. Eventually, I almost grew accustomed to it, accepting it as one of the apartment's unexplainable quirks, a ghostly little nocturnal serenade. It wasn't frightening, just odd. The shift began subtly, insidiously. It started with the tune itself. One evening, I was feeling particularly stressed after a difficult day at work. As if on cue, the music box began to play from the living room. But the melody, it wasn't quite right. It seemed to drag, the tempo noticeably slower than usual. Each note felt heavier, laden with a profound melancholy that resonated disturbingly with my own low spirits. The sweetness was still there, but it was curdled with sadness. Another time, gripped by a sudden wave of anxiety about an upcoming presentation, the familiar tinkling started, but this time it sounded off-key. Certain notes clashed jarringly, creating a brief, unpleasant dissonance before resolving back into the main theme. It felt agitated, mirroring my own internal turmoil with uncanny precision. I started paying closer attention, filled with a new kind of unease. Was I imagining these changes, projecting my own emotional state onto the simple mechanics of the box? I tried recording it with my phone when it played unexpectedly. Listening back, the tune always sounded normal, the standard simple melody. Yet, I knew what I had heard in the moment: the dragging tempo, the sore notes. The discrepancy was deeply unsettling. Was the box reacting to my presence, my mood, in a way technology couldn't capture? The ballerina figure inside also began to exhibit strange behavior. Normally, she would stop facing directly forward when the music ended. But now, sometimes I would find her stopped at a different angle, turned slightly towards the window, or facing a dark corner of the room. Once, after playing its particularly melancholic variation, I found the ballerina stopped with her back completely turned, facing the velvet lining as if in silent rejection. There was no logical reason for this variation in her stopping position. It felt meaningful, significant. A strange compulsion began to grow within me. When the music box played its altered tunes, I felt drawn to listen, even when the sounds were unpleasant or unsettling. Leaving the room felt difficult, like breaking a spell. The melody, even in its distorted forms, developed a hypnotic quality. It seemed to resonate directly with my emotional state, sometimes soothing, sometimes amplifying my anxiety or sadness. I began to feel as though my own feelings weren't entirely private anymore, that this object was somehow listening, responding, perhaps even subtly influencing my moods through its changing music. The thought was deeply invasive. I tried to resist. I moved the music box from the mantelpiece to a bookshelf, hoping distance would lessen its effect. It still played. I put it inside a drawer. I could still hear the faint, tinkling melody, now sad, now agitated, muffled but persistent, through the wood. It seemed determined to be heard. I even considered getting rid of it, but found myself strangely reluctant. Some part of me was still charmed by it, another part perhaps morbidly curious, and a growing part was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if I tried to dispose of it. Afraid of the connection, however disturbing, that seemed to have formed between my inner state and this intricate machine. The psychological toll mounted. I felt perpetually on edge, wondering when the box would play next, and what version of its tune I would hear. Was it merely reflecting my emotions, a bizarrely empathetic machine? Or was it feeding on them, manipulating them? The line blurred. The once charming object now felt like a parasite, subtly entwined with my psyche. The breaking point arrived during a night of intense, unrelated fear. A violent banging on my apartment door, which turned out to be a drunk neighbor confusing apartments, sent a surge of adrenaline and terror through me. My heart was pounding, hands shaking as I stood frozen in my living room after the noise subsided. And in that moment of peak fear, the music box on the bookshelf burst into sound. But it wasn't music. Not anymore. It was a horrific cacophony. A high-pitched screeching, a grinding of metal on metal, a chaotic jumble of wrong notes played at frantic speed, amplified to an almost unbearable volume. It sounded like the delicate mechanism was tearing itself apart, screaming in mechanical agony. My eyes flew to the box. The lid was wide open, and inside, the tiny porcelain ballerina was no longer twirling gracefully. She was spinning violently, uncontrollably, a frantic blur of pale pink and white. Faster and faster she spun, looking as if she would shatter into 1,000 pieces or fly off her spindle entirely from the sheer centrifugal force. It was a grotesque parody of her usual delicate dance. The screeching sound drilled into my ears, into my skull. Instinct took over. I lunged towards the bookshelf, grabbed the violently vibrating box, ignoring the painful noise, and slammed the lid shut. The screeching cut off instantly. Silence crashed back into the room, heavy and ringing. My ears throbbed. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I stood there, clutching the now silent, closed music box, gasping for breath. I couldn't keep it. Not after that. The malevolence, the sheer wrongness of that final performance was undeniable. That night I wrapped the music box in thick layers of cloth, stuffed it into a sturdy cardboard box, sealed it with packing tape, and hid it deep in the back of my storage closet, buried under old blankets and forgotten junk. I needed it gone, silenced, out of sight. For a while, peace returned. The apartment felt quiet, blessedly ordinary. The phantom melodies ceased. The unsettling connection felt broken. I began to sleep better, the constant low-level anxiety receding. But the silence, it seems, was temporary. Or perhaps the music was never truly confined to the box. It started subtly, maybe a month later, just fleeting moments easy to dismiss. Standing in the kitchen, I'd hear, just for a second, a few faint notes whistled softly. Seemingly from the hallway, the opening bar of the music box's original, simple tune. Or sitting reading, I'd catch a whisper of the familiar melody hummed almost inaudibly, as if from another room or perhaps just inside my own head. It's never the distorted versions. Always the original, simple, slightly melancholic lullaby. Just fragments, echoes, drifting on the air like dust motes in sunlight. There one moment, gone the next. Is it my memory playing tricks? My mind, scarred by the experience, conjuring phantom sounds? Or did the entity, the influence tied to that music box, merely detach itself from its physical anchor when I silenced it? Did it seep into the apartment itself, or worse, into me? I don't know. All I know is that the silence now feels watchful, and sometimes in the quietest moments I catch those faint, familiar notes. And the simple, once charming melody now feels infinitely more sinister than any screeching distortion, a gentle, persistent reminder that the music never truly stopped. It just changed its stage. My waking life is unremarkable, I suppose. A predictable rhythm of work, chores, occasional social engagements, the quiet routine of a single person living in a modest city apartment. It's a life built on schedules and familiar routes, the steady, reassuring tick of the clock moving from one known point to the next. Perhaps it's this very predictability that makes the dream so jarring, so persistent, such an unwelcome intrusion into the ordered landscape of my consciousness. It started years ago, maybe. Infrequent at first, just a strange, unsettling dream that would occasionally surface, leaving a residue of unease upon waking. But over the past 6 months, it has become relentless. Almost every night, I find myself back there. The dream always begins the same way. I'm driving, I don't know where I'm coming from, or where I intend to go. I just am behind the wheel of a car. Sometimes it feels like my own, sometimes like an older, unfamiliar model navigating a road shrouded in impenetrable darkness. It's always night, a deep, moonless night where the headlights seem feeble, barely cutting through an oppressive, swirling fog that blankets everything. The fog is thick, damp, muffling all sound except for the low, monotonous rumble of the car's engine and the crunch of tires on what feels like cracked, uneven asphalt. There are no lines on the road, no signs, no other cars. On either side, indistinct shapes loom out of the fog, sometimes gnarled, skeletal trees, other times just barren, empty fields stretching into the unseen. The feeling in the dream is one of profound desolation, isolation, and a creeping, inescapable dread. I feel compelled to drive forward, unable to slow down significantly or turn back, as if guided by an unseen force or trapped in a predetermined path. The air in the dream feels cold, clammy, and I often wake with the phantom sensation of that damp chill still clinging to my skin. And always, the dream journey leads towards the same destination. Emerging gradually from the fog in the distance, a structure begins to take shape. Sometimes it seems like a dilapidated roadside motel, other times more like an abandoned gas station or a forgotten Kabaja-style diner. Its exact form flickers, but the core elements remain constant. Broken or boarded up windows like vacant eyes, a sagging roofline, maybe a rusted, unreadable sign hanging precariously, or a single, flickering neon light casting a sickly, buzzing glow that barely pierces the fog. It radiates a palpable sense of wrongness, of deep decay and sorrowful neglect. Every time, as the building looms closer, becoming clearer in the headlights, the dread intensifies into near panic. My heart pounds in the dream, my hands grip the phantom steering wheel. I know with absolute certainty that I must not reach it, and every single time, just as I feel I am about to pull up to its crumbling facade, just as the flickering light threatens to reveal some final horror within, I wake up, gasping, drenched in sweat, the image of the dilapidated building seared behind my eyelids, the feeling of desperate flight lingering. Initially, it was just a disturbing dream, albeit a persistent one. I'd shake it off, shower, drink coffee, immerse myself in the concrete reality of my day job. But slowly, subtly, the dream began to bleed into my waking hours. The hyper-realism intensified. I started waking up not just feeling the cold, but actually shivering, needing to pull an extra blanket around myself even on mild nights. Sometimes the faint smell of wet earth, or something vaguely metallic like rust, would linger in my nostrils for minutes after waking. The low rumble of the dream car's engine would sometimes echo in my ears, fading only gradually into the morning quiet. Then came the intrusions into my perception. Driving on the highway during my actual commute, I'd see a particular clump of beaten pine trees by the roadside, and feel a jolt of uncanny recognition. They looked exactly like the skeletal trees lining the dream road. I'd glance at a faded billboard, and a fragment of a word or image, maybe a stylized O, or a picture of a broken cup, would spark a chilling sense of familiarity, matching some half-remembered detail of the sign on the dream building. These were fleeting moments, easily dismissed individually, coincidence, overactive pattern recognition, but their accumulation felt significant, targeted. Physical souvenirs started appearing. Waking up one morning, I found a small, tarnished copper coin resting on my nightstand. It wasn't mine. I had no idea where it could have come from. It felt cold, worn smooth, and vaguely foreign. Another time, a single dry, brittle oak leaf, unlike any from the trees in my city neighborhood, was stuck to the inside of my pajama leg. And once, a faint smudge of reddish, brown mud on my bedside lamp, though my shoes had been left clean by the front door. Where were these things coming from? Was I somehow bringing them back from that foggy, desolate place? The thought was both ludicrous and terrifying. A compulsion grew within me, an obsession taking root. I started spending hours online, scrolling through satellite maps of remote areas, searching for desolate roads, abandoned motels, forgotten diners that matched the dream's geography. I looked through databases of missing persons, wondering if the dream was tied to some real tragedy. I felt a growing, irrational need to find the road, to prove it was real, or perhaps to prove it wasn't, even as the thought of actually finding it filled me with icy dread. My waking thoughts became increasingly preoccupied with the dream, its atmosphere seeping into my days, making my ordinary life feel pale and unreal by comparison. The boundary between dream and reality began to fray at the edges. I'd have moments of intense disorientation. Did I see that particular cracked pavement yesterday on my way home, or was it in the dream last night? Was that faint smell of damp decay real, or just a phantom scent carried over from sleep? My memory felt unreliable, porous. I started experiencing more frequent micro-sleeps or moments of zoning out, sometimes accompanied by a fleeting image of the foggy road or the dilapidated building flashing behind my eyes. The climax arrived, as perhaps it inevitably had to, behind the wheel. I was driving home late one evening after visiting a friend in a neighboring town. The route involved a stretch of less traveled state highway through a relatively rural area. Actual fog began to roll in, not unusual for that time of year, but thicker than expected, reducing visibility significantly. I slowed down, peering through the windshield, wipers working rhythmically. I must have missed a turnoff in the fog, or perhaps followed a GPS instruction that rerouted me due to an accident I hadn't heard about. Suddenly, I realized the road's surface had changed. The smooth asphalt gave way to older, cracked pavement. The painted lines vanished. The sparse streetlights disappeared, plunging me into a deeper darkness lit only by my headlights cutting through the now incredibly dense, swirling fog. On either side, the shapes of gnarled, leafless trees emerged from the mist, exactly like the ones in my dream. My heart leaped into my throat. A wave of cold dread washed over me, so intense it felt physical. "No?" I whispered.
It can't be.
But it was. This was the road. The air felt heavy, damp, smelling of wet earth and something else, something like stale gasoline or decay. The engine of my actual car seemed to take on the low, monotonous rumble of the dream car. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Part of me screamed to stop, to turn around immediately. But another part, the part consumed by months of obsessive dreaming and fearful curiosity, felt an inexorable pull forward. I had to see. I drove slowly, cautiously, peering into the soupy fog. The road remained empty, desolate. The silence, apart from my engine, was profound. Then ahead, through a momentary thinning of the fog, I saw it. A faint, flickering light, reddish-orange neon. As I drew closer, the shape emerged. It was the building. Not exactly like any single dream iteration, but an unmistakable composite of all of them. The sagging roofline, the boarded-up windows like vacant sockets, the rusted, skeletal frame of a sign above the door, bearing only a single, flickering, buzzing neon letter, perhaps an O or a C, partially burned out. It sat there, hunched by the roadside, radiating an aura of profound neglect and deep, sorrowful wrongness. It was real. The dream was real. This place existed. The sight filled me with a terror so absolute it almost paralyzed me. But the car kept rolling forward, drawn towards the flickering light as if caught in a current. I was maybe 50 yards away, the details becoming clearer, the peeling paint, the dark, empty doorway like a waiting mouth, when sheer panic finally broke through the horrified fascination. With a choked cry, I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the left, tires screeching on loose gravel I hadn't seen, performing a desperate, clumsy U-turn. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, urging my car back the way I came, away from that terrible, beckoning structure. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I drove blindly, frantically, through the oppressive fog, heart hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the fog began to thin. The road's surface became smoother. Painted lines reappeared. I saw the familiar green sign for the state highway I had somehow left. I merged back into normal traffic, back into the world I recognized, shaking uncontrollably, tears of relief and terror streaming down my face. I made it home, somehow. But the experience shattered something fundamental within me. Did I stumble upon a real place that my subconscious had somehow latched onto? Or did the dream, the persistent obsession, somehow manifest that road, that building, into reality just for me, just for that moment? I can't be sure. The line is irrevocably blurred. Now, I live with the echo. The road itself vanished behind me that night. I've tried, cautiously, during daylight hours, to find that wrong turn again, but the landscape seems stubbornly ordinary, offering no clues. Yet the feeling remains. Sometimes, without warning, even on a bright, clear afternoon, a patch of that specific, thick, swirling fog will momentarily roll across my path, obscuring my vision, chilling the air, bringing with it the phantom scent of damp earth and decay. before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. It feels like a reminder, a tendril reaching out from that other place, that dream made real. It feels like the road is still out there, waiting patiently, knowing that one day, perhaps when I'm tired or lost, or simply not paying attention, I might take that wrong turn again. And this time I might not have the strength or the will to turn back before I finally reach the destination I've been driving towards in my sleep for all these years. The city's subway system is its lifeblood, a network of veins pulsing beneath the concrete skin. Millions of us rely on it daily, a shared experience of screeching brakes, stale air, flickering lights, and the rhythmic roar through dark tunnels. For me, working long hours often meant catching the last train home, the one that runs just after midnight. In those late hours, the familiar system transforms. Platforms that teem with people during the day become vast, echoing caverns, dimly lit and deserted. The trains themselves rattle through the tunnels, carrying only a handful of ghosts, solitary figures slumped in seats, staring blankly, or lost in the blue glow of their phones. There's a certain liminal quality to it, a feeling of being suspended between the sleeping city above and whatever lies dormant in the depths below. I used to find a strange sort of peace in that late-night solitude. Not anymore. It started subtly, as these things often do. Minor glitches in the familiar rhythm, sometimes, deep in the longest stretches of tunnel between stations, the fluorescent lights inside my usually near-empty car would flicker more erratically than usual. Not just the occasional stutter, but a frantic, almost spastic dance of light and shadow that made my eyes ache. Other times, it was the opposite, an unnerving absence of sound. The expected deafening roar of the train rushing through the tunnel, the wind buffeting the windows, would suddenly diminish, replaced by an odd, heavy silence, as if the train were momentarily gliding through a vacuum. It would last only a few seconds, then the usual cacophony would crash back in. Power fluctuations, I'd tell myself. Track work further down the line affecting the acoustics. Plausible deniability. Then came the things I saw, or thought I saw, in the tunnels themselves. The windows of the train, streaked with grime, reflect the car's interior lights. But if you stare intently out into the blackness rushing past, you can sometimes catch glimpses of the tunnel wall itself, the grimy tiles, the bundles of cable, the occasional signal light, and the recessed maintenance alcoves that dot the tunnels like empty eyes. It was in these alcoves, illuminated for a fraction of a second by the train's passing lights, that I started seeing shapes. At first, it was just an impression, a darker shadow within the alcove that seemed too solid, too defined to be just shadow, or a flicker of movement deep within a side tunnel entrance as we sped past. I'd blink, trying to focus, but we'd already be gone, plunging back into darkness. Debris, I'd rationalize. Discarded equipment left by work crews. Tricks of the light and speed, but the glimpses became more defined, more unsettling. Once, I saw what looked distinctly like a figure huddled in the back of a maintenance niche, knees drawn up, head bowed. Another time, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette standing perfectly still just inside the opening of a ventilation shaft. Always gone in an instant, always leaving me with a racing heart and the cold sweat of doubt. Did I really see that? Could I have? The atmosphere on the deserted late night platforms began to feel different too. The usual echoes seemed amplified, distorted. Waiting alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights, the vast emptiness of the station felt expectant, and I started hearing sounds drifting from the dark mouths of the tunnels at either end of the platform. Not the approaching rumble of a train, but other noises, faint whispers that seemed to ride on the stale, metallic-smelling air. A dry, scuttling sound, like something moving just out of sight on the tracks. Once, a distinct metallic scrape, long and drawn out, echoing from deep within the tunnel darkness. These sounds were always fleeting, always vanishing when I strained to listen, leaving only the low hum of the station's electricity. The feeling of being watched became almost constant during these late night waits. A heavy awareness pressing on the back of my neck, the irrational certainty that eyes were observing me from the darkness down the tracks, or from the shadowed recesses of the station architecture. I'd find myself compulsively scanning the platform, peering into the gloom, seeing nothing but empty benches and tiled walls, yet the feeling would persist until the welcome roar of the approaching train finally broke the tension. One night, it crystallized into something more concrete. The train was rounding a long curve in the tunnel, its headlights cutting a swath through the darkness ahead. For a brief second, the beam illuminated the tracks maybe 100 yards down the line, and standing there right between the rails was a figure. Motionless, tall and dark. I couldn't make out details, whether it was facing towards or away from the train. It was just there, where nothing should be. My breath caught. Surely the driver saw it. Surely the train would brake. But no, the train continued its course. The figure was swallowed by the returning darkness as we rounded the bend, and the journey proceeded as normal. No alarms, no sudden stops. When we pulled into the next station, I scanned the driver's cabin. He looked bored, oblivious. Had I hallucinated it? A discarded pile of trash bags, a particularly convincing shadow. Doubt warred with the chilling certainty of what I felt I'd seen. My late-night subway rides became exercises in controlled anxiety. I started choosing more crowded cars if possible, avoiding looking out the windows in the tunnels, keeping headphones on even without music playing, just to block out potential whispers from the platform. I considered switching routes, taking buses, spending exorbitant amounts on taxis. The subway, once a mundane convenience, now felt like a nightly descent into a place where the normal rules didn't quite apply, where the darkness between stations held possibilities. The inevitable climax occurred on a Thursday night. I was on the very last train, even later than usual after a project ran unexpectedly long. The car was almost empty, just me, a man dozing near the front, and a woman staring blankly at her phone further down. We were deep in one of the oldest, longest tunnels on the line, the section that runs beneath the river. The rhythmic clatter and roar were hypnotic. Then, with a violent screech of brakes that threw me forward in my seat, the train jolted to a sudden, jarring halt. The sleeping man snorted awake. The woman looked up, startled. Silence descended, thick and immediate, broken only by the low hum of the train's idling systems. We sat there, suspended in the darkness beneath the river. After a moment of confused silence, the lights flickered erratically. Once. Twice then they went out completely. Even the advertising panels went dark. Only the dim greenish emergency lights activated, casting long, distorted shadows and making the familiar car look alien and threatening. Murmurs of confusion and annoyance rippled through the few passengers. And then the sound started. Faintly at first, almost inaudible over the hum. A dry, scratching sound, like sand being dragged across metal, or like fingernails. It seemed to be coming from outside the train, near the doors on my side. Screw rape, pause a screw rape. My blood ran cold. Every nerve ending felt alive. I strained my ears, holding my breath. The scratching stopped. Then, a sharp tap, tap, tap sounded against the window right beside my head. I flinched violently, suppressing a cry. It was followed by another series of taps, further down the car. Then more scratching, this time seeming to come from the roof. Something was outside. Something was moving around the train, trapped here with us in the pitch black tunnel deep beneath the river. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with shared, unspoken fear. The woman further down whimpered softly. The man who had been sleeping was now wide awake, eyes darting nervously towards the windows. The scratching moved back towards the doors, more insistent now, accompanied by louder, more deliberate thumps. As if something were testing the seals, probing for a way in. I was frozen, picturing shapes moving in the absolute darkness, just inches away on the other side of the metal and glass. The emergency lights cast just enough feeble glow to make the impenetrable blackness outside the windows seem even more absolute, more menacing. How long had we been stopped? 5 minutes? 10? It felt like an eternity. Just as the scratching seemed to reach a frantic peak right by the main doors, the main lights flickered back on, painfully bright after the gloom. The scratching and tapping ceased instantly. A moment later, with a lurch that made everyone jump, the train shuddered back into motion. No announcement came over the intercom. No explanation. The train simply proceeded as if nothing had happened, pulling into the next station under normal lighting. As the doors hissed open, I scrambled out, not even waiting for my actual stop. I stumbled onto the brightly lit platform, looking back at the train with wide, terrified eyes. The few other passengers hurried off as well, casting nervous glances back at the car, avoiding each other's gaze, united in their silent, inexplicable terror. I never took the last train again. I rearranged my work schedule, paid for taxis, walked long distances, anything to avoid being underground, alone after midnight. But the tunnels, they don't feel entirely left behind. Even now, living miles away from that particular subway line, sometimes late at night, when my apartment is quiet, I hear things. The faint, distant rumble of a train passing underground where no tracks exist. The echo of screeching brakes fading on the edge of hearing. And sometimes, worse than anything, when the wind is quiet and the night is still, I hear it. That faint, dry, persistent scratching sound, seeming to come from just outside my bedroom window, as if whatever lurks in the darkness between stations occasionally remembers and comes looking. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a place designed for noise and laughter when it's out of season. Our apartment complex has a modestly sized outdoor swimming pool, a cheerful blue rectangle that's the heart of the community during the hot summer months, echoing with splashing, shouting, and the tinny beat of portable radios. But now, deep into autumn, it lies dormant. A heavy, dark green tarp is stretched taut across its surface, secured by water bags along the edges, protecting the basin from falling leaves and the impending chill. The brightly colored lounge chairs are stacked and covered in a corner of the concrete deck, the diving board removed, the cheerful pool rules sign looking faded and forlorn. The whole area, visible from my living room window, exudes an air of hibernation, of waiting for warmth and life to return. Or so I thought. My living room overlooks this dormant scene. Often, late at night, I find myself drawn to the window, gazing out at the still, covered pool under the cool glow of the security lights or the indifferent moon. The silence from that area used to feel peaceful, a sign of the changing seasons, until the sounds began. It started very faintly, a soft drip, drip, drip. I assumed it was rainwater collecting on the tarp and dripping off the edge onto the concrete deck below. Perfectly normal. But the sound persisted even on dry nights, and sometimes it wasn't a drip but a soft plochet, like a single hand gently disturbing the surface of water. Coming, it seemed, from the direction of the pool itself. An animal maybe, I wondered. A raccoon trying to drink, or a bird that got trapped underneath. I'd peer out, but the heavy tarp lay undisturbed, the area silent and still whenever I looked directly. The sounds remained infrequent, easily dismissed. But then came the footprints. One damp morning, heading out early for work, I noticed them on the concrete path that skirts the pool area. Dark, wet footprints. Barefoot impressions, surprisingly clear in the thin layer of dew covering the pavement. They started near the locked gate to the pool area, walked towards the pool, and then stopped. Abruptly, several feet away from the pool's edge. They didn't lead to the pool, nor did they circle it. They just materialized on the path, took a few steps towards the covered water, and vanished into nothing on the dry concrete closer to the basin. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. I looked around. No other wet patches, no sign of anyone having been there. The gate was securely locked. I checked again later that day when the sun was up. The footprints had evaporated, leaving no trace. But the image remained lodged in my mind. I saw them again twice over the next few weeks, always after a damp or dewy night, always the same pattern appearing from nowhere, heading towards the pool, vanishing before reaching it. Whose footprints were they? And why did they stop? An unusual chill began to settle around the pool area, unrelated to the autumn air temperature. Even on relatively mild evenings, walking near the pool enclosure felt like stepping into a pocket of damp coldness. It clung to the skin, raised goosebumps, and felt heavy. Sometimes, carried on this cold air, would be the distinct, sharp chemical tang of chlorine. It was baffling. The pool had been drained below the filter level, treated, and covered weeks ago. There shouldn't be any strong chlorine smell remaining, certainly not one that seemed to ebb and flow like a phantom tide. I started watching the pool cover more intently during my late night vigils at the window. It was usually perfectly still, a dark, unmoving expanse. But occasionally, I began to notice things. A faint tremor running across the surface like a shiver, or more disturbingly small, concentric ripples would sometimes appear briefly in one spot on the taut tarp, spreading outwards for a second before vanishing, as if something large had gently nudged the cover from underneath. There was never any wind on these nights. No falling leaves or debris could account for it. It implied movement within the hidden water beneath the heavy cover. My feelings towards the pool area shifted from autumnal melancholy to a quiet, persistent dread. The dormant space no longer felt merely asleep. It felt watchful. The dark water hidden beneath the tarp began to feel like a veiled eye, concealing something ancient and patient. I found myself keeping the blinds on that side of the living room closed more often, avoiding the view, trying to ignore the faint sounds or the phantom smells that sometimes drifted towards the building. I developed a low-level anxiety about water, about darkness, about the unseen things that might lurk in still depths. The climax, like the phenomena preceding it, was quiet, unexpected, and deeply chilling. I was woken late one night, not by a sound this time, but by a feeling, an intense sense of stillness, of waiting. The air in my apartment felt heavy. Drawn by an unease I couldn't name, I went to the living room window and pulled back the edge of the blind. The security lights cast their usual pale glow on the pool area. Everything looked normal at first glance. The tarp was in place, the deck empty. But then my eyes adjusted. One corner of the heavy, dark green pool cover, near the deep end, was pulled back, folded over itself, revealing a sharp, dark triangle of the water beneath. I stared, my heart starting to pound. Had the wind done that? It seemed impossible. The cover was heavy, secured. The water revealed was perfectly black, reflecting nothing, like a void. It was utterly still. No ripples, no movement. And then I saw it, floating just beneath the surface of that black water, within the exposed triangle, was something. It wasn't solid, more like a disturbance in the water's darkness, a shape defined by a faint internal luminescence, pale milky white, almost phosphorescent. Its form was indistinct, vaguely elongated, perhaps humanoid, perhaps something else entirely organic, ancient. It hovered there, maybe an inch below the surface, eerily still, yet radiating an intense cold that I could almost feel even through the window pane. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were locked on this pale, submerged anomaly. It didn't move, didn't react. It just floated, an impossible light in the lifeless water. As I watched, paralyzed, it began to descend, not swimming, but sinking vertically, slowly, smoothly, like a waterlogged effigy being drawn downwards. Its faint luminescence faded as it sank deeper into the blackness, until it vanished completely from sight. The black water lay still and empty once more. After a moment, with a soft, sighing sound that might have been the wind, but probably wasn't, the corner of the heavy pool cover slowly, impossibly, unfolded itself and slid back into place, sealing the pool completely once more. I let the blind fall back, my hand trembling violently. I stumbled back from the window, collapsing onto the sofa, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? What unholy thing resided in the chemically treated, dormant water of our community pool? I avoid looking at the pool now, day or night. I keep the blinds closed on that side of the apartment. But the knowledge of what lies beneath the cover is a constant, heavy weight. Sometimes late at night, I still hear it, the faint plush of disturbed water, or the soft drip drip. And occasionally, a breath of that unnaturally cold, damp air, carrying the sharp tang of chlorine, seems to find its way into my apartment, even with the windows closed. I feel with a certainty that chills me to my core that the pool isn't merely dormant, it's occupied. Something resides in those dark, still depths. Something ancient, perhaps something water-logged, something that perhaps only surfaces when the world is asleep. It waits patiently beneath the heavy tarp, through the cold months, occasionally stirring, reminding me of its presence. And I live with the quiet terror of knowing it's there, just beyond my window, hidden in plain sight, patiently waiting for summer to return. Or perhaps, just waiting for another chance to show itself in the dead of night. My phone is practically an extension of my arm. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. It's my connection to friends, my work hub, my news source, my entertainment center, my navigator, my bank, my memory keeper. It lies on my nightstand while I sleep, sits beside me while I eat, rests in my pocket or my hand throughout the day. It holds countless photos, private messages, financial details, the intimate minutiae of my entire existence, all contained within that sleek rectangle of glass and metal. It felt indispensable, safe even, until it started talking back in ways it shouldn't. It began with the predictive text. You know, the little gray suggestions that pop up above the keyboard, trying to guess your next word. Usually it's uncannily accurate, sometimes amusingly wrong. But then it started getting weird. While typing a mundane email to my boss, it suggested words like afraid, watching. Replying to a friend's text about weekend plans, it offered or alone, or darkness, or cannot escape. At first, I chalked it up to a software glitch, maybe a corrupted dictionary file from a recent update. I cleared the cache, restarted the phone. The strange suggestions persisted, sometimes vanishing for a day, then returning with renewed peculiarity. They started getting more personal, referencing things I'd only thought about, or fears I harbored privately. Typing, need to buy milk, and having it suggest, he sees you. Texting, good night, and the gray bar offering, don't sleep. It was unnerving, like a bizarrely specific malfunction, but still potentially explainable as algorithmic crossed wires, perhaps picking up on ambient conversation or browse history in unsettling ways. Annoying, creepy even, but I tried to ignore it, turning off predictive text for a while, then tentatively turning it back on, hoping the glitch had resolved itself. The real fear started with the messages. I was watching a movie one evening, phone lying face down on the coffee table. It buzzed a text message notification. I glanced at the sender. My own name, my own number. My blood ran cold. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. The message preview showed only a jumble of random characters and symbols sur face. I opened it. That was it. Just meaningless symbols. Erased, a system error. A spoofed number somehow using my own contact. But why? I deleted it, my heart pounding, trying to push down the rising panic. It happened again a few days later. Another text from myself. This time just a single word, Solos. Close to what? Close the door? Close my eyes? The ambiguity was terrifying. I frantically checked my sent messages, nothing. I checked my account with my carrier online, no record of outgoing messages I didn't recognize. I tried blocking my own number in my contacts, the phone wouldn't allow it. Then came the warnings, or what felt like warnings. A text from me, YNDBoo. I rushed to my apartment window. Nothing unusual outside. Another night BND. I spun around, scanning my empty living room, heart hammering. The messages were infrequent, unpredictable, serving only to ratchet up my anxiety, making me feel like I was being toyed with by something invisible, something that had somehow hijacked my digital identity. Other anomalies began cropping up. My phone's battery life plummeted. A full charge would barely last half a day, even with minimal usage. The back of the phone often felt unnaturally warm to the touch. Checking the battery usage statistics showed nothing out of the ordinary. No single app draining power excessively. It was as if the phone itself was constantly running some hidden, intensive process beneath the surface. The screen started acting strangely too. Sometimes, when waking the phone, the dark lock screen would catch the light in a peculiar way, and in that brief moment of reflection, I'd glimpse at something. Not my own reflection clearly, but a fleeting, distorted shape superimposed on it, like a face pressed against the glass from the inside, stretched and warped, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. It was there for only a fraction of a second, gone the instant the screen fully lit up. I could never be sure if it was just a trick of the light, a smudge on the glass, or my own stressed mind playing tricks. But the image or the impression of it lingered. My call log became a source of dread. Entries appeared for calls I never made or received. Calls to unknown number, lasting only a second or two. Calls logged from my own number to my own number, occurring at times when the phone was locked and sitting untouched on my desk or nightstand. It felt like probes, like something testing the connection, using my own digital footprint to create inexplicable ripples. The paranoia intensified, focusing specifically on the cameras. Both the front, facing, and the rear lenses began to feel malevolent. I developed an overwhelming, irrational certainty that they were active, watching me, recording me, even when the phone indicated they were off. I started covering the lenses with small pieces of tape, feeling slightly foolish but compelled by a desperate need for privacy. Yet, even with the lenses obscured, the feeling persisted. It wasn't just about the physical lens. It felt like the phone itself possessed an awareness, a gaze that transcended the hardware. It had transformed from my most trusted personal device into a potential spy, an intimate enemy lying constantly within reach. I barely slept. The predictive text, when I dared to use it, continued its unsettling suggestions. The random texts from myself arrived just often enough to keep me perpetually on edge. I felt constantly monitored, exposed, my digital life compromised by an invisible, incomprehensible entity. Was it a hacker of impossible skill, a new kind of invasive malware, or was it something older, something non-physical that had somehow learned to manipulate the digital world, choosing my phone as its vessel, its window? I found myself talking to the phone sometimes, whispering pleas or curses at the inert object, feeling increasingly isolated and unhinged. The climax arrived with brutal, technological terror in the dead of night. I had finally drifted into an exhausted, uneasy sleep. The phone placed deliberately face down on the far side of the room on a bookshelf, as far from my bed as possible. I was woken abruptly by its insistent buzzing, vibrating loudly against the wood in the otherwise silent room. Dread washed over me, cold and heavy. I didn't want to look. I knew, somehow, that this was it. But the buzzing continued, demanding attention. Pulling myself out of bed, legs weak, I stumbled across the room and picked up the phone. The screen lit up. A new message notification. From my name. Receive it just now. My thumb trembled as I unlocked the phone and opened the message. It wasn't text this time. It was a photo. Or rather, a live photo, one of those short, looping video clips. The image displayed was horrifyingly familiar, my own bedroom, dimly lit by the faint glow from the window. And in the bed was me, asleep, or appearing to be. The perspective was chillingly clear. It was filmed from the upper corner of the room, near the ceiling, looking down at the bed, at me. The loop showed my sleeping form stirring slightly, then settling. The timestamp in the corner indicated the photo had been taken less than 60 seconds ago, while I was supposedly asleep. From inside my locked room, sent from my own number. The watcher wasn't just in the phone, it was in the room. It had been standing right there in the corner watching me sleep, using my own device to send me proof. Something inside me snapped. A scream tore from my throat, raw and ragged. It wasn't thought, just pure primal reaction. I hurled the phone with all my might against the opposite wall. It hit with a sickening crack, bounced, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of lines. It wasn't enough. I lunged at it where it lay on the floor, stomping on it again and again, grinding the glass and plastic under my heel until it was a mangled wreck of components. Silence. Blessed, terrifying silence. The buzzing stopped. The screen was dark, lifeless. I stood there, panting, chest heaving, surrounded by the glittering shards of my former digital life. A sense of violent catharsis washed over me, quickly followed by bone-deep terror. The phone was destroyed, but the overwhelming, suffocating feeling of being watched hadn't diminished. If anything, it felt stronger now, more direct, no longer filtered through a screen or mediated by text messages. It was raw, present, focused intently on me in the wreckage-strewn room. I slowly backed away from the destroyed phone, my eyes darting towards the corners of the room, especially the corner from which the photo had been taken. There was nothing there, just shadows. But I could feel it, an invisible presence, cold and aware. Maybe the phone was never the source, merely the tool. A window it had used to peer through, a voice box it had borrowed, and I had just shattered the glass. Now it didn't need a window anymore. It was here, untethered, and it was still watching. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around myself, suddenly feeling incredibly cold. The silence of the room pressed in, no longer comforting, but pregnant with unseen attention. On the far wall, the screen of my powered-off television flickered once, briefly displaying a field of static before going dark again. It was probably nothing, just residual charge. Probably.